What if a routine celebrity interview suddenly turned into the kind of television moment no one in the studio could ignore? What happens when an outspoken host meets a guest who refuses to be rattled? Not with anger, not with insults, but with calm confidence. Today's story explores a dramatic showdown built around one unforgettable question. What happens when criticism stops being a conversation and starts becoming a personal attack? And what if the person in the spotlight answers with nothing more than grace, wit, and unwavering self-belief? For decades, Dolly Parton has been admired not only for her music, but also for her ability to stay composed under pressure. She's built a reputation for kindness, quick humor, and never losing sight of who she is, no matter who's asking the questions. But even someone with that level of experience can find themselves facing a conversation that suddenly takes an unexpected turn. In this imagined on-air confrontation inspired by the public personas of the people involved, a seemingly ordinary appearance becomes a battle of confidence, respect, and resilience. As the discussion grows more intense, every response raises the stakes, and the balance of the conversation begins to shift in ways no one expected. Was this simply a heated exchange of opinions? Or was it the moment one calm voice exposed the difference between challenging someone's ideas and attacking their character? Stay with us, because the tension doesn't build all at once. It rises one question at a time, one response at a time, until the entire conversation reaches a breaking point that leaves everyone stunned. If you'd like, I can now expand the introduction in the same style and pacing. Dolly Parton has spent decades in the public eye, earning admiration not just for her legendary music career, but for the warmth, humility, and quick wit that have become her trademark. Through countless interviews, award shows, and live television appearances, she's developed a reputation for handling even the toughest questions with a smile. No matter how challenging the moment, Dolly has always seemed to know exactly how to keep her composure. On the other side of the table is The View, a daytime talk show famous for lively debates, passionate opinions, and interviews that can quickly take unexpected turns. The panel has built its reputation on asking direct questions and encouraging spirited discussion, which is exactly why audiences tune in every day. Sometimes those conversations remain thoughtful. Other times they become unforgettable. In this fictionalized showdown inspired by the public personas of the people involved, what begins as a routine interview is expected to focus on Dolly's latest projects, her remarkable career, and the charitable work that has touched countless lives. The atmosphere is friendly, the audience is excited, and everything appears to be unfolding like another successful television appearance. But beneath the polite smiles, a different kind of conversation is quietly taking shape. At first, the questions seem harmless enough. A few light-hearted observations, a few playful remarks. Nothing that would suggest the interview is about to head in a completely different direction. Yet with every passing minute, the tone begins to shift. The focus moves away from accomplishments and toward personal choices, and what should have been a celebration of a remarkable career slowly transforms into an increasingly uncomfortable exchange. Most guests might respond with frustration. Others might become defensive. Some might simply laugh it off and try to change the subject. Dolly chooses a different path. Rather than raising her voice or matching criticism with criticism, she answers with calm confidence. Every response is measured. Every word is deliberate. Instead of allowing the conversation to spiral, she patiently redirects it, forcing everyone in the room to think more carefully about what is actually being discussed. As the tension builds, the studio's energy begins to change. What started as an ordinary interview gradually becomes a battle of ideas, respect, and self-confidence. The reactions around the table grow more noticeable, and it becomes increasingly clear that this conversation is no longer going according to anyone's expectations. By the time the discussion reaches its turning point, one thing has become impossible to ignore. Sometimes the strongest response isn't the loudest one. Sometimes staying calm is the most powerful statement a person can make. And that's exactly where this remarkable confrontation begins. The applause is warm. The introductions are cheerful. At first glance, everything feels exactly the way viewers would expect. Dolly Parton arrives with the same bright smile and effortless charm that have defined her public image for decades. She greets everyone with genuine warmth, thanks the hosts for having her, and settles into the conversation as though she's catching up with old friends. The interview begins on a positive note. Questions about her latest projects, her passion for music, and the connection she shares with generations of fans create an easy rhythm. Dolly answers each one with the blend of humor and sincerity that has made audiences admire her for so many years. She laughs easily, shares a few lighthearted stories, and makes everyone around the table feel included. For a brief moment, it seems like this will be another enjoyable television appearance. But then the atmosphere begins to change. One comment shifts the tone ever so slightly. It isn't openly hostile, yet it carries an unmistakable edge. Instead of focusing on Dolly's achievements, the conversation drifts toward her public image. What sounds like an innocent observation at first quickly feels more like a challenge than genuine curiosity. Dolly notices the change immediately. Years of experience have taught her how to recognize when an interview is moving in an unexpected direction. Rather than reacting emotionally, she keeps smiling. Her posture remains relaxed. Her voice stays calm. To anyone watching, she appears completely unfazed, but it's clear she's choosing every word carefully. The follow-up question pushes a little further. Once again, the spotlight shifts away from decades of accomplishments and toward personal choices. Instead of discussing songwriting, philanthropy, or business success, the conversation begins circling around appearance and public perception. The mood at the table subtly changes. The easy laughter that filled the opening moments becomes less frequent. The smiles are still there, but they no longer feel quite as natural. Even the conversation itself starts losing its relaxed rhythm as the exchange becomes more pointed. Still, Dolly refuses to take the bait. She responds with grace, acknowledging the question without allowing it to define the interview. Rather than becoming defensive, she gently reminds everyone that authenticity means being comfortable with who you are, regardless of whether everyone approves. It's a simple response, delivered with kindness, yet it quietly changes the energy in the room. For the first time, it becomes obvious that this isn't going to be an ordinary celebrity interview. The discussion has crossed an invisible line. What began as casual conversation is slowly turning into something far more personal. Everyone can sense it, even if no one says it out loud. And this is only the beginning. Neither side is ready to back away, and with each new question, the tension continues to build toward a confrontation that neither the audience nor the hosts could have predicted. I can continue with point 2 in the same style and maintain a smooth narrative flow. Just when it seems the conversation might return to safer ground, the tone shifts again. Instead of asking about the creative process behind a new song or the lessons learned from decades in the entertainment industry, the discussion begins focusing on Dolly herself. Not her work, not her accomplishments, her image. It starts with a seemingly harmless observation, a comment about her signature style. Then another. Before long, what appears to be casual conversation begins sounding more like a series of personal critiques. The questions become less about understanding Dolly's perspective and more about challenging the choices she's made throughout her career. Dolly doesn't interrupt. She listens carefully, maintaining the same calm expression she's carried since the interview began. Her patience is unmistakable. She allows each question to finish before responding, never raising her voice or showing visible frustration. That composure only seems to make the exchange more intense. As the discussion continues, the questions become increasingly direct. The focus remains fixed on appearance, public image, and whether those choices send the right message. The conversation gradually drifts further away from Dolly's music, charitable work, and decades of professional success. The contrast becomes impossible to ignore. On one side sits a guest who continues answering thoughtfully. On the other, an interviewer determined to keep steering the conversation back toward personal criticism. The energy around the table begins to change. The easy smiles from earlier are replaced with thoughtful expressions. The natural flow of conversation starts breaking apart as each new question carries more weight than the last. Even brief pauses begin feeling longer, as if everyone realizes the interview is moving into uncomfortable territory. Yet Dolly refuses to match the growing tension. Instead of responding emotionally, she answers with quiet confidence. She explains that every public figure makes choices about how they present themselves, and that those choices don't erase years of hard work, dedication, or meaningful accomplishments. Her point isn't delivered as an argument. It's offered as a perspective. That difference matters. Rather than escalating the conflict, Dolly keeps inviting the conversation back to substance. She speaks about staying true to yourself despite changing trends and outside opinions. She reminds everyone that authenticity isn't about fitting someone else's expectations. It's about being comfortable in your own identity. For a moment, it seems as though the conversation might settle down. But it doesn't. Another challenging question follows almost immediately, carrying an even sharper tone than before. This time, the discussion feels less like an exchange of ideas and more like an attempt to put Dolly on the defensive. The audience can sense the shift. What began as a routine interview has clearly become something else entirely. Every response from Dolly remains measured, respectful, and composed. Yet with each passing minute, the difference in approach between the two women becomes more obvious. One continues pressing harder. The other refuses to abandon her calm demeanor. And that's exactly when the balance of the conversation begins to change. Without raising her voice or showing even a hint of anger, Dolly starts earning something far more powerful than winning an argument. She begins earning the room's attention. The questions may have become increasingly personal, but the way Dolly handles them is quietly setting the stage for a turning point that no one at the table sees coming. By now, it's obvious that the conversation isn't unfolding the way anyone expected. The questions have grown more pointed, the pauses between answers feel heavier, and the atmosphere has shifted from friendly conversation to unmistakable tension. Yet despite the increasingly personal tone, Dolly refuses to let the moment dictate her behavior. She doesn't interrupt. She doesn't raise her voice. And she certainly doesn't respond with personal attacks of her own. Instead, she does something far more effective. She listens. Every question is met with patience. Every criticism is allowed to land before she calmly begins her response. Rather than reacting emotionally, Dolly chooses to answer thoughtfully, demonstrating the kind of self-control that can only come from decades of experience in front of cameras and live audiences. There's a quiet confidence in the way she speaks. It's the confidence of someone who no longer feels the need to prove herself. After a lifetime of success, countless achievements, and years of connecting with people around the world, she understands that staying calm often speaks louder than trying to win an argument. As the discussion continues, Dolly gently redirects the focus. Instead of becoming trapped in a debate about appearances, she begins talking about purpose. She explains that every artist builds a public identity in their own way, but lasting success isn't created by image alone. It's earned through hard work, consistency, and the relationships built with audiences over time. Her words aren't defensive. They're reflective. She acknowledges that not everyone has to agree with her choices, and that's perfectly fine. What matters, she explains, is respecting the fact that different people find different paths to success. No single approach belongs to everyone. For a brief moment, the conversation seems to slow. The room grows noticeably quieter. Even those following the discussion closely appear to recognize that Dolly isn't interested in trading insults. She's interested in raising the level of the conversation. That shift changes everything. What began as an attempt to challenge her personally slowly transforms into a broader discussion about individuality, respect, and the freedom to make one's own choices without seeking approval from others. The contrast between the two approaches becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. The more pressure Dolly faces, the calmer she appears. The more direct the criticism becomes, the more measured her responses sound. It's as though every attempt to unsettle her only strengthens her resolve to remain gracious. Those watching can sense that something important is happening. This is no longer about one difficult question or one uncomfortable exchange. It's becoming a lesson in how composure can reshape an entire conversation. Without speaking louder than anyone else, Dolly gradually begins controlling the pace and direction of the discussion. And that subtle change doesn't go unnoticed. The energy around the table shifts again. Reactions become more restrained. The confidence that fueled the earlier challenges no longer seems quite as certain. For the first time, it feels as though the conversation has reached a crossroads. One path leads toward more confrontation. The other leads toward understanding. Dolly has already made her choice. She refuses to abandon kindness, even when faced with criticism. She refuses to sacrifice dignity for the sake of scoring points. And in doing so, she quietly turns what could have become an emotional argument into something much more powerful. The interview has entered a completely different phase. Because from this moment forward, the discussion is no longer centered on Dolly's ability to answer difficult questions. It's centered on whether anyone across the table can match the grace with which she's answering them. And that realization sets the stage for the biggest turning point of the entire conversation. By this stage of the conversation, it's clear that neither side is willing to step away from the discussion. What began as a few pointed questions has evolved into something much larger. The exchange is no longer confined to a single topic. Every answer now leads to another challenge, and every challenge seems designed to push the conversation further than before. Rather than changing direction, the questioning becomes even more persistent. The discussion circles back once again to Dolly's public image, her long-established style, and the choices she's made throughout her remarkable career. The implication is unmistakable. Should someone with her influence be presenting herself differently? For the first time since the interview began, the room feels divided. Some appear eager to hear the conversation move back toward Dolly's work and accomplishments. Others wait quietly, curious to see how she will respond to yet another difficult question. Dolly doesn't hesitate. With the same calm expression she's maintained from the beginning, she answers without sounding defensive or irritated. She explains that people often mistake confidence for conformity. Choosing to express yourself in a particular way, she says, doesn't automatically define your values or your character. Her response is measured, thoughtful, and impossible to dismiss with a simple rebuttal. Instead of arguing about appearances, she shifts the conversation towards something much deeper. She speaks about individuality, about respecting personal choices, about understanding that success can take many different forms. According to Dolly, true confidence isn't about convincing everyone to agree with you. It's about remaining comfortable with who you are, even when opinions differ. That perspective changes the rhythm of the conversation. The questions continue, but they no longer seem to have the same effect. Each attempt to corner Dolly is met with another composed explanation. Rather than becoming flustered, she carefully addresses the point before gently steering the discussion back toward broader ideas that resonate far beyond celebrity culture. The audience begins sensing the difference. This is no longer simply an exchange between two people. It's becoming a conversation about respect itself. The atmosphere grows noticeably heavier. Long pauses begin separating each response. Every silence carries its own weight, making the next question feel even more significant than the last. Across the table, confidence starts giving way to visible frustration. The expected emotional reaction never arrives. No raised voice. No angry outburst. No dramatic interruption. Instead, Dolly continues responding with patience, and that patience gradually becomes her greatest strength. The longer the discussion continues, the more obvious it becomes that calmness can be just as persuasive as confrontation. Around the table, subtle reactions begin telling their own story. Expressions grow more serious. Brief glances are exchanged. The conversation that started with confidence now carries an unmistakable sense of uncertainty. Even without anyone saying it aloud, everyone seems to recognize that the momentum has shifted. The harder the criticism becomes, the stronger Dolly's responses appear. Not because they're louder, not because they're harsher, but because they remain focused on ideas rather than individuals. That distinction becomes impossible to ignore. Instead of attacking anyone personally, Dolly continues emphasizing empathy, understanding, and the importance of allowing people to define success on their own terms. Her words encourage reflection rather than retaliation, creating a striking contrast with the increasingly tense atmosphere surrounding the discussion. As the debate reaches another critical moment, one thing becomes perfectly clear. The conversation is no longer unfolding according to its original course. The pressure that was meant to place Dolly on the defensive has started producing the opposite effect. Every thoughtful answer strengthens her position, while every new challenge only highlights the growing imbalance in the exchange. And that's when the real turning point begins to emerge. Without making a scene, without changing her tone, and without abandoning her trademark kindness, Dolly starts doing something no one expected. She begins asking questions of her own. And with that simple shift, the entire conversation is about to change. Until this point, Dolly has been answering every question placed in front of her. Patiently, respectfully, without ever appearing rattled. But now something changes. Rather than simply responding, she begins guiding the direction of the discussion herself. It's a subtle shift at first, almost easy to miss. Yet within moments, it becomes clear that the conversation is no longer revolving around criticism alone. It's beginning to revolve around something much more meaningful. Dolly pauses before speaking. When she finally responds, her voice remains calm, but every word carries unmistakable purpose. Instead of debating personal preferences or trying to defend every decision she's made throughout her career, she invites everyone to consider a bigger question. What should we really judge people by? Their appearance? Their personality? Or the impact they've had on the lives of others? The question hangs in the air. For the first time since the interview began, the discussion isn't focused on Dolly's image. It's focused on values. She explains that every person has the freedom to express themselves differently. Some choose simplicity. Others embrace glamour. Some speak softly. Others are outspoken. None of those choices, she suggests, automatically determine a person's integrity or contribution. According to Dolly, character is revealed through actions, through kindness, through consistency, through the way people treat those around them when the cameras aren't rolling. As she continues, the energy around the table noticeably shifts. The earlier confidence that fueled the criticism begins giving way to hesitation. The conversation no longer feels one-sided because Dolly isn't arguing over opinions anymore. She's encouraging everyone to think about the principles behind those opinions. Rather than defending herself, she redirects attention toward respect. She explains that people don't have to agree on every issue to treat each other with dignity. Healthy conversations, she says, leave room for disagreement without turning into personal attacks. The strongest ideas don't need insults to stand on their own. Those words resonate, not because they're dramatic, but because they're delivered with complete sincerity. Every sentence feels deliberate, measured, and impossible to dismiss without serious thought. The atmosphere grows quieter. The conversation slows. Even the brief pauses between responses seem to carry more weight than before. No one interrupts. No one rushes to change the subject. Everyone appears to recognize that the discussion has reached a completely different level. The focus has moved beyond celebrity, beyond television, beyond public image. It's now about how people choose to treat one another when opinions collide. As the exchange continues, Dolly gently reminds everyone that success should never become an excuse for judging others unfairly. Every individual, regardless of profession or background, deserves the opportunity to be evaluated by the substance of their work rather than assumptions based on appearance alone. Her words don't sound rehearsed. They sound lived. They reflect decades of experience navigating praise, criticism, and public scrutiny without losing sight of who she is. That authenticity begins changing the emotional balance of the conversation. The earlier tension starts working in Dolly's favor, not because anyone declares her the winner, but because her steady composure creates an undeniable contrast with the increasingly strained atmosphere surrounding the debate. By now, it feels as though the discussion has reached an invisible turning point. The questions that once seemed designed to place Dolly on the defensive no longer carry the same force. Instead, each new exchange reinforces the themes she's been emphasizing all along: respect, empathy, and the freedom to choose your own path without seeking permission from others. It's a quiet reversal. There is no dramatic outburst, no raised voices, no attempt to score easy points. Just one thoughtful response after another, gradually transforming the conversation into something far more significant than anyone expected when the interview began. And as that realization settles over the room, one thing becomes impossible to ignore. The balance of the discussion has changed completely. The pressure has shifted, and everyone can sense that the most decisive moments are still ahead. By now, the atmosphere feels nothing like it did at the beginning of the interview. The easy smiles have faded. The light-hearted rhythm that usually defines these conversations has disappeared, replaced by long pauses and carefully chosen words. Every new exchange carries more weight than the one before it, and it becomes increasingly clear that this is no longer an ordinary discussion. Something has changed, not because anyone has raised their voice, not because the conversation has become chaotic, but because the emotional balance has quietly shifted. Throughout the interview, Dolly has remained remarkably consistent. She hasn't abandoned her composure for a single moment. While the discussion has grown increasingly tense, her approach has stayed exactly the same: calm, thoughtful, and respectful. That consistency begins having an unexpected effect. The more composed Dolly appears, the more noticeable the tension around the table becomes. Every response she gives seems to slow the pace of the conversation, encouraging everyone to think before speaking. The contrast couldn't be clearer. One side continues pressing the discussion. The other continues answering with patience. As that difference becomes more obvious, the energy in the room begins changing in subtle but unmistakable ways. The conversation no longer feels like a debate with a clear direction. Instead, it feels like everyone is waiting for the next sentence, wondering whether it will calm the situation or push it even further. For the first time, silence becomes one of the loudest parts of the exchange. Each pause stretches just a little longer. Each response is followed by a moment of reflection. No one seems eager to interrupt anymore. That hesitation says more than words ever could. The remaining hosts, who earlier appeared ready to keep the discussion moving, now seem far more cautious. Rather than steering the conversation back to safer topics, they allow the exchange to unfold naturally, recognizing that something important is taking place. No one wants to cut it short. No one wants to speak over anyone else. Instead, everyone appears focused on understanding where the conversation is heading next. Meanwhile, Dolly never changes her approach. She doesn't celebrate small victories. She doesn't attempt to embarrass anyone. She simply continues explaining her perspective with the same warmth and confidence that has defined her entire career. She reminds everyone that disagreement doesn't have to become disrespect, that strong opinions don't require personal criticism, and that conversations are most meaningful when people are willing to listen as carefully as they speak. Those ideas begin resonating beyond the immediate discussion. What started as a conversation about one public figure gradually transforms into something much broader, a reflection on how differences can either divide people or encourage greater understanding. The emotional intensity continues building, not through louder voices, but through quieter moments. The audience can almost sense that every person involved understands the significance of what's unfolding. No dramatic gestures are needed. The weight of the discussion is carried entirely by the words being exchanged. As the momentum continues shifting, it becomes increasingly difficult to ignore one simple reality. The conversation has slipped away from its original purpose. It's no longer centered on criticism. It's centered on character. Not the character someone projects. The character someone demonstrates under pressure. And that's where Dolly's greatest strength becomes impossible to overlook. Throughout the entire exchange, she has remained consistent. Respectful without being passive. Confident without being arrogant. Firm without becoming hostile. Those qualities gradually reshape the atmosphere around the table, creating a moment that feels larger than any single disagreement. By now, everyone senses the discussion is approaching its defining moment. The questions have become sharper. The stakes feel higher. And the next exchange has the potential to determine how the entire conversation will be remembered. The turning point is no longer approaching. It's right in front of them. And what happens next will leave a lasting impression on everyone involved. Everything that has happened up to this moment seems to lead here. The earlier questions, the growing tension, the long pauses, the careful responses. Each moment has quietly built toward a conversation that now reaches its emotional peak. By this stage, neither side is speaking merely to answer the previous question. They're speaking from two completely different perspectives, each convinced they're defending something important. The room falls noticeably quieter. No one seems interested in interrupting anymore. Every person present appears to understand that the next few words could define the entire interview. Dolly takes a brief pause before responding. Not because she doesn't know what to say, but because she understands the importance of saying it the right way. When she finally speaks, her tone is steady, measured, and remarkably calm. She explains that throughout her life, she's learned one lesson above all others. People will always have opinions. Some will admire your choices. Others will question them. Some will celebrate your success, while others will search for reasons to criticize it. The only thing any person can truly control, she says, is how they respond. That thought immediately changes the direction of the conversation. Rather than defending every decision she's ever made, Dolly shifts the focus towards something much deeper. She talks about respect, about allowing people to live differently without assuming those differences are flaws, about recognizing that confidence doesn't have to look the same for everyone. She points out that two people can arrive at completely different conclusions while still treating each other with dignity. That's where meaningful conversations begin. Not with agreement, but with mutual respect. Her words aren't dramatic. They're sincere. And that sincerity gives them far more weight than any clever comeback ever could. The discussion slows again. Every sentence seems to linger just a little longer before anyone attempts to respond. It's as though everyone around the table is processing what has just been said. The conversation no longer feels like a contest. It feels like a moment of reflection. Dolly continues by explaining that public figures naturally invite opinions. That's part of the responsibility that comes with living in the spotlight. But there is an important difference, she suggests, between asking difficult questions and making assumptions about someone's character based solely on personal preferences. She believes those distinctions matter. Because once conversations stop focusing on ideas and start focusing on individuals, everyone loses something valuable. The room grows even quieter. No one appears eager to rush into another challenge. The discussion has reached a point where every response carries unusual significance. Dolly's composure never changes. She isn't trying to win. She isn't trying to embarrass anyone. She's simply explaining why kindness and accountability should never be viewed as weaknesses. According to her, remaining respectful during disagreement often requires more strength than raising your voice ever could. Those words seem to settle over the conversation. The earlier tension begins giving way to something else. Reflection. For the first time since the interview began, it feels as though everyone is looking beyond the disagreement itself and considering the larger message behind it. The exchange has become about far more than celebrity, far more than television, far more than one difficult interview. It's become a reminder that confidence isn't measured by how loudly someone speaks. It's measured by how firmly they stand by their values when those values are challenged. As Dolly finishes her thought, another long silence follows. But this silence feels different. It's no longer uncomfortable. It's meaningful. It signals that something important has just been said. The emotional momentum has shifted completely. What began as a challenging interview has transformed into a conversation about character, resilience, and the quiet power of staying true to yourself. And with the defining exchange now behind them, only one question remains. How will the conversation end when neither side is willing to abandon its position? That answer is only moments away. After the defining exchange, the energy in the conversation shifts once again. Not with a dramatic interruption, not with raised voices, but with something far more revealing. For the first time since the discussion began, there seems to be a noticeable hesitation before the next response. The confidence that drove the earlier challenges appears less certain, and the conversation loses the relentless pace it carried from the very beginning. Dolly doesn't take advantage of the moment. She doesn't celebrate. She doesn't press harder simply because the balance has shifted. Instead, she waits. Patiently, respectfully, giving the discussion every opportunity to return to a more constructive path. When the conversation resumes, Dolly gently reminds everyone that disagreement is part of every meaningful discussion. Different opinions aren't the problem. The real problem begins when people stop listening to understand and start speaking only to prove themselves right. It's a simple observation, yet it seems to change the mood once again. Rather than answering criticism with more criticism, Dolly explains that every successful person eventually learns an important lesson. You cannot build genuine understanding by assuming the worst about someone else's intentions. Respect has to come first. Without it, every conversation eventually turns into people talking past one another instead of learning from each other. The room grows quiet, not because there is nothing left to say, but because every sentence now seems to invite reflection instead of argument. The earlier momentum toward confrontation begins fading, replaced by a sense that the discussion has reached its natural conclusion. Dolly continues with the same steady confidence that has defined the entire exchange. She explains that she has never expected universal agreement. No artist does. No public figure does. Different viewpoints are inevitable, and thoughtful criticism can often be valuable. But criticism, she says, is most meaningful when it's rooted in curiosity rather than assumptions. That distinction becomes the central message of the conversation. Instead of focusing on personalities, Dolly encourages everyone to focus on principles. Treat people fairly. Listen before judging. Allow room for different paths to success. Those ideas, she suggests, are far more important than debating someone's personal style or public image. As she finishes speaking, another pause follows. This time, it feels less like tension and more like contemplation. The discussion has traveled a long way from where it began. What started with pointed observations has evolved into something much broader. A conversation about respect, perspective, and the value of extending grace even during disagreement. Dolly never claims to have all the answers. She simply shares what experience has taught her. That confidence doesn't require putting others down. That kindness isn't weakness. and that remaining true to yourself is often the most difficult choice a person can make when facing criticism. Those thoughts linger. No dramatic declaration is necessary. No final jab. No attempt to score the last point. The calmness with which Dolly speaks becomes the most memorable part of the entire exchange. By now, everyone can sense that the conversation has reached a turning point from which there's no returning to the light-hearted atmosphere of the opening moments. The questions have been asked. The perspectives have been shared. And regardless of where anyone stands, one thing has become impossible to ignore. The discussion has evolved into something much larger than anyone expected when it first began. With the tension finally beginning to ease, attention naturally turns toward bringing the interview to a close. But before the conversation ends, one final moment will shape how the entire exchange is remembered. By now, the conversation has reached a point where everyone understands there's no returning to the relaxed atmosphere that existed just a short time ago. The discussion has traveled too far. Too many difficult questions have been asked. Too many deeply held beliefs have been challenged. And while neither side appears willing to abandon their perspective, one thing has become unmistakably clear. The interview itself has changed. What began as a routine celebrity appearance has transformed into a conversation that people would likely remember long after the cameras stopped rolling. The room feels unusually still. No one seems eager to break the silence. Every person present appears to recognize that the interview has reached its natural conclusion. There is little left to debate. The central ideas have already been expressed. Respect, individuality, the freedom to choose one's own path, and the importance of treating others with dignity, even during disagreement. Dolly takes a slow breath before speaking once more. Her voice remains as calm as it was at the beginning of the interview. If anything, it sounds even steadier now. She explains that public life has taught her something she considers invaluable. People will always disagree. Some will celebrate your choices. Others will question every decision you make. Trying to satisfy everyone is impossible. Trying to remain true to yourself is not. She says that every challenge presents a choice. You can respond with anger. You can respond with resentment. Or you can respond with grace. Only one of those responses, she believes, leaves room for understanding. Those words seem to settle over the conversation like a final chapter drawing to a close. No one immediately replies. There is nothing left to interrupt. Nothing left to prove. The intensity that dominated the earlier exchanges gradually gives way to quiet reflection. For a brief moment, the discussion no longer feels divided. It simply feels finished. The remaining hosts gently guide the conversation toward the purpose of the interview, inviting Dolly to speak about the work and projects that originally brought her there. Without hesitation, she accepts the change in direction. There is no lingering frustration. No attempt to revisit the disagreement. No desire to prolong the tension. Instead, she smiles warmly and begins speaking about the things that have always mattered most to her: music, creativity, and making a positive difference wherever she can. It's a subtle but meaningful transition. Rather than allowing the disagreement to become the interview's final impression, she redirects attention toward hope, purpose, and the work she continues to do. That decision says as much as any answer she has given throughout the conversation. As the interview draws to a close, the atmosphere feels completely different from where it began. Not lighter, but clearer. Everyone has witnessed how quickly an ordinary discussion can evolve into something much more significant. More importantly, they've seen how composure can influence the direction of even the most difficult conversations. The exchange may have started with disagreement. It may have been marked by moments of tension and opposing viewpoints. But it ends with a reminder that confidence isn't measured by how forcefully someone argues. It's measured by how consistently they uphold their principles when challenged. Whether viewers agree with every point raised or not, one lesson stands above everything else. Character is revealed most clearly when emotions are running high. Anyone can remain gracious when the conversation is easy. The real test comes when criticism arrives unexpectedly, and every response has the power to shape what happens next. As the discussion finally comes to an end, one lasting impression remains. True confidence rarely demands the final word. More often than not, it simply leaves one. As the conversation comes to a close, it's worth stepping back and looking at the bigger picture. Whether you agreed with every point raised or viewed the discussion differently, one thing is hard to ignore. Moments like these capture attention not simply because they involve well-known personalities, but because they touch on something everyone experiences at some point in life: how we respond when our beliefs, choices, or character are questioned. Throughout this fictionalized showdown inspired by the public personas of the people involved, one message remained consistent. Confidence doesn't always announce itself with the loudest voice. Sometimes it appears in the quiet decision to stay composed when emotions are running high. Sometimes it shows itself through patience instead of anger. And sometimes the strongest response is choosing not to let someone else's opinion determine your own sense of worth. The conversation also reminds us that disagreement, by itself, isn't the problem. Healthy debate has always been part of meaningful conversations. Different perspectives challenge us to think, learn, and sometimes even reconsider our own assumptions. The real challenge begins when respect disappears. Once discussions become personal instead of thoughtful, everyone involved risks losing sight of what truly matters. That's why this exchange leaves such a lasting impression. It isn't simply about one interview. It isn't simply about one celebrity. It's about the choices people make when facing criticism. Do they answer with hostility? Do they respond with patience? Or do they look for common ground, even when agreement seems impossible? Those questions extend far beyond television. They apply to workplaces, friendships, families, and everyday conversations where opinions naturally differ. One respectful response has the power to change the entire direction of a discussion. Likewise, one careless comment can do exactly the opposite. Perhaps that's the most valuable lesson of all. Success isn't measured only by achievements or recognition. It's also measured by how people conduct themselves when they're under pressure. Anyone can appear confident when everything is going well. The real measure of character often appears during the moments that test patience, humility, and self-control. If this story encourages anything, let it be this: listen before judging. Respect differences even when you don't share them. And remember that every person has a story shaped by experiences no one else can fully understand. A little empathy can often accomplish far more than another argument ever will. Now we'd love to hear from you. If you found yourself in a conversation like this, how would you handle it? Would you respond immediately, or would you take a moment to gather your thoughts before speaking? Do you think staying calm is the strongest approach, or do you believe there are moments when being more direct is necessary? Share your perspective in the comments below. Respectful discussions are always welcome, and hearing different viewpoints is part of what makes conversations like these worthwhile. If you enjoyed this story and want more engaging celebrity discussions, thoughtful breakdowns, and compelling entertainment content, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.